Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. The topic for today is robotics in senior living, maximizing efficiency and embracing change. My name is Justin Smith. I am the Senior Manager of Innovation and Technology with Direct Supply, and I'll be hosting today's presentation. This webinar is intended to provide general information, but not legal advice. Today, our goal is to really talk about this application of robotics within senior living, to talk about kind of what we have seen so far, some best practices that have been met as well. So when we think about this as a challenge that the industry is facing, I think it's probably no surprise to everyone that, we're seeing all sorts of issues around staffing. I talk to customers all over the country, and, for the last couple of years, at least, the number one challenge that they're facing is I can't find enough people to help me get work done around this building. And so, from our standpoint, as we're looking at it from the standpoint of, all right, what can we do to help? I think that there's a lot to be had when we look at what work is actually being done within the community, and are there things that we can actually automate? So, we don't necessarily want to take caregivers away from residents, but there's all sorts of things within the building that may not necessarily be value add to those residents, or the interaction between staff and residents. Those are the things we want to take a look at. So, of no surprise, we lost a tremendous amount of the workforce over the course of the pandemic. We're starting to see that rebound, but even at the current rates, we're still likely a number of years out from kind of reaching those pre-pandemic levels. And so, what can we do to bridge that gap for now, right? I think we talk to customers, and no one's talking about how they want to reduce staffing right now, right? More so, it's I have 15 openings that I can't fill. Help me reduce some of that burden, so that I can run my building as effectively as possible. So my role within Direct Supply is on the innovation side. And so my focus is on taking that voice of customer, understanding what those problem sets are out in the wild, and turning those into solutions. And so we go through this process that's called, ideate, incubate, realize. And the whole thought process behind it is that the ideate phase, we're basically defining the problem, right? So we're trying to have the conversation, understand where the problem exists, and make sure that we're getting down to the root cause, right? We don't want to treat a symptom. We want to treat the source if at all possible. And so we go out and research solutions. We'll talk about it for some of these robotic solutions. We started with, 70 different things we looked at before we actually got down to the one that we thought was actually meeting the need. So once we get past that, we get to the incubate phase. And this is where we really look at, all right, how do we evaluate these things? So how do we do internal evaluations? How do we take them out into the field and do, evaluations within customer sites, long-term pilots? The big goal here is, how do we validate that the value we think is being delivered is actually being delivered? There's all sorts of marketing claims around different solutions about the impact that it can have. But how do we go out there and prove it and make sure that that is being able to be realized and realized consistently across kind of, different operators, different acuity levels, all those types of things. And so that's really where that realize function happens. As we've gone through that process, we're confident that we can have this impact across different customer groups. And now we're ready to actually bring it to market. So, just a quick plug on this cool space that I get to work out of. This is our Innovation and Technology Center in downtown Milwaukee. And this is the whole focus of this space is it's a space to think differently. So we bring customers in, we deep dive into those problem sets. We have startups that we work with, all the way to bringing in researchers. We're on the campus of Milwaukee School of Engineering. We bring in researchers, so we get to see kind of what is research telling us is going to be happening maybe 5 years from now, so that we can start thinking about it and think about what it means to actually put it in practice. And with that, we go out and we look for solutions all over the place. Ultimately, our goals are, can we lower the cost of delivering healthcare? Can we demonstrably improve these resident outcomes? Or can we show that we can actually increase revenue for operators? So those are kind of the lenses that we look through in new solutions, and hoping that we can hit, at least one, if not multiple of those. And so through that, over the last really 6 or 7 years, we've vetted 3,500 plus different startups. We are actively out there looking for solutions. And that's where I say, when we start at 70 and whittle it down, it's a big funnel. And so regardless of what the problem set is, we can't just find one thing and say, this is it. We need to do kind of some comparative analysis with that as well. So today's focus, let's talk about robotics. Let's talk about what it looks like within this industry today and some of the best practices we've learned on making it successful within a community. So I like to start with kind of this focus when I'm talking about this. And it really is to get people to think about how we actually apply robotics. So today, what we really say is, robotics are focused on replacing tasks and not replacing people. People within the building that are doing work, I can have them, drop what they're doing at a moment's notice, go over and work on something totally different, right? We're ultimately configurable. We can go and do just about anything if given the direction. Well, the robotics that are out there are really good at doing a singular thing and doing it over and over and over again. So when you think about the application of robotics today, think about it more like assembly line versus some, autonomous humanoid robotic walking around the building. So what are those tasks that we're doing over and over again, where if we automate them, we can get some kind of economies of scale? So as we started digging into this to understand, where is staffing a concern? Where can automation really come in? We really kind of looked across 3 different verticals. So food service was the first one that we looked at. And really because it was where probably the most mature solutions actually existed. So if you've seen, videos of, overseas robots going through airports or going through restaurants and things like that, this is something that's really been kind of accepted for quite a number of years if you look at the Asian market. And part of this is because they're dealing with some of the same staffing challenges. They've been dealing with them for years that we're starting to see now. They have an aging population. They have less people that are in the workforce, yet there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And so, food service was one of the first ones that came out, and it's where we kind of started, our investigation. I think EVS is another one. And so that's everything from, the environmental services side of floor cleaning to things like UV disinfectant, ultrastatic sprayer robotics to go through a building and sanitize surfaces, all sorts of different things that are there, maybe a little less mature, so a little newer to this market, but certainly a lot of development happening there. And then probably the least mature in all of it, but the one that is actually kind of demanded the most is clinical assistance. And so this is one where there's a handful of solutions out there, but they're all pretty immature at this point, to be totally honest. The cost is kind of crazy, depending on what you're looking at. And it's not totally clear that it's something that we want to automate. We may not want to automate direct, staff to resident interactions. We may want to continue that because that's a valuable interaction that's happening, but maybe it looks like robotics to help in clinical support. So maybe instead of clinicians going and searching for resources and tooling and supplies, there's robotics that can actually bring that to the bedside, right? So again, what are some of those tasks that we can actually automate versus, automating an entire person's worth of work? So today, I'm really going to focus on the kind of food service side of things and use this as our example. But a lot of the things that I'm going to talk through are going to be just as valid for, EVS or any other applications of robotics. And so when we start looking at it, we really start with the goal of we need to be able to measure impact. And so what is that value that is ultimately going to be delivered to the community, to the person who's ultimately going to pay the bill for putting this thing in place? And then what are we actually going to test? Like, what are we going to measure to make sure that we actually see this impact? So as we talk about food service robotics, we talk about things like, all right, if I put this robot in place, does it actually reduce the full-time equivalent need for dining services, right? So can I shift labor around? If it's harder to find people to work a dinner shift or a lunch shift, can I shift resources around because I'm opening up some capacity? Can I look at things like wage shift? And so, can I reduce the cost of a food service? Or what some people are doing are looking at, can I take some of those savings and actually pay a higher wage for frontline staff because it's tough to find those people? I think we saw a lot of kind of limited dining services, room deliveries, those types of things, which kind of took labor off. Can we have impact there? And ideally, can we actually increase staff engagement with residents? And so if you think about a dining service today, it's a lot of running back and forth and not necessarily a lot of direct engagement with the residents. Even though one of the resident feedback pieces is they love that piece. They love getting to know their servers. They love getting to have some conversation. And the servers love having those conversations as well. But when they're overworked or overburdened, it's more running back and forth and they don't actually get that quality time. So we think about the value that can be created, but then we think about how are we actually going to measure this? And so we look at all these measurables, or can we understand, the hourly cost of the robotic solution we're putting in? What are our staffing levels? Things like step count for staff members. How often are they running back and forth? Like how many steps are they actually putting in? Are we able to be more efficient in our service? Are we serving more meals in a smaller amount of time? And all the way to the resident satisfaction, right? So do residents like robotics? Are they worried about them? I'll ruin this a little bit. What we've seen so far is residents actually love robotics, especially when we've looked at the food service side. We'll get some side eye from residents when we first introduce a robotic solution, but they very quickly learn that it's there to make their experience better. They love it. They're taking pictures of them. They're naming them. My personal favorite is they're sending pictures to their friends that live in other communities and bragging about how their community has a robot and this other community doesn't. All sorts of great things that we've seen there. So as we think about this task versus people piece, and we think about it for food service, we start by looking at all those tasks that are being done. This is an illustration of that one person who's providing care for a single or multiple residents at a single table. What's all the running back and forth that they're doing, right? They're doing all this running back and forth, and at the end of their shift, they collapse on the floor, right? They're seating people, they're going to ordering kiosks and entering those orders in, or maybe taking a paper ticket even. They're running back and forth to the kitchen. They're ferrying dirty dishes away. They're grabbing soups and salads. They're getting beverage refills throughout the service. So tons of back and forth that is actually happening. So as we look at all of this back and forth, this is where we really drive the conversation of, all right, these are all the different tasks that can be done. What things can we automate? So, maybe we don't necessarily want to automate that staff member, showing the people to their table or taking the order. But maybe all that back and forth to the kitchen, bringing meals out, taking dirty dishes to the back of house, bringing beverages out, things like that, we can actually look at automating to optimize, again, the interaction between that front of house staff member and those residents, or even allow that staff member to handle more residents at one time. So as we're looking at this, we say, all right, we understand how crazy it is to actually support a food service. Now let's go out and start looking at what solutions are there. And this is where for us, we really started at about 70 different solutions. So we went out, did a ton of research. We looked at everything from startups to, overseas websites that I could just buy a robot and have it, drop shipped to my door. I will tell you that's probably not the way to go. But, we looked at everything that was out there. And as you can see on the left, fundamentally, they all kind of look the same. They're kind of all this robotic base, maybe some type of screen, a bunch of trays. So they all look the same. But then we kind of dive into, well, is the capability and the functionality that they're providing actually the same? And so we go through that and we understand the capabilities and we start narrowing it down to the point of saying, all right, these are maybe the 2 or 3 that we think are the most competitive. We think these are going to meet the need from a pricing perspective, from a service perspective. So what if something goes wrong? A battery dies, someone forgets to plug it in overnight, or something else happens, and now this thing doesn't work. Well, what does the service look like? Does this mean I'm going to get service today? Or does it mean I'm going to get service a week from now? Or I have to, ship this thing back to the manufacturer to get fixed versus someone coming to my community and actually fixing it. So those are all things that we look at and we say, all right, let's do a deeper dive. Let's start gathering some feedback. Let's start testing some of these things in-house to understand the impact that they can have. And then eventually we get to the point of saying, all right, we think these are maybe the one or two that have the most potential, we're going to go out and we're going to do some heavier testing. So we're going to go do customer testing. We're going to go out in the wild and put these in place. We're going to gather feedback from the people that are working with the systems, from the residents within those communities. We're going to look at the impact that they're able to have within a service. And then we're going to say, yep, this is the one that checks all the boxes. And this is the one that we're ready to say, we're ready to kind of take that next step and move on and potentially bring this thing to market. So for us, this whole process started with 70. We narrowed it down to one. And it took the better part of a year, maybe a little more than that, almost 18 months, to go from kind of starting to look at solutions to get down to a singular one. And so eventually they graduate, right? We identify the one that we think meets the need and does it in the best way. And we start kind of rolling that out and introducing it to our customers. And so you get to that one, you're able to say, all right, this is how we want to move forward. Now we're going to go out and make it a reality. Now, behind the scenes, when we're doing all of this testing, we're also gathering this information to understand beyond just the technology itself, what are all the other things that need to happen within a community to actually make this thing successful. So it's one thing to say, like, we've identified the solution, but I can guarantee you with any of these, robotic platforms, you're not just going to drop it in place and not change anything else that you're doing and realize the impact, right? So there's a behavior change component that's tied to this. So we think about kind of the business impact side of this. As we're looking at this, and this is kind of specifically for the food service side, through our testing and the pilots we were able to do, we were able to see that one robot could do basically the equivalent of about 1.5 FTEs worth of work. The nice part about robotics is, they don't get sick. They don't call in. They don't show up late. As long as you plug them in overnight, they're going to be there for every shift, every day. And so if you're using them every day for every shift, these things can operate for, as little as $4 an hour. I think with some of the new pricing that's out there, it's even less than that, down to like $2 an hour. And so when you compare that to the cost of, full-time labor, there's considerable savings there. And like I said, we understand that for a lot of our customers, you're not necessarily looking at, how can I remove people, but more so, how do I get this work done when I still have, 5 or 6 openings right now? And so, this savings means that, hey, maybe I can actually reduce the overall cost of my service. Instead of having to hire, 7 more people, I only need to hire 5 or 4. So those are really some of the conversations that, we're having with our customers at this point. So process reengineering. So we've talked about the kind of technology itself. Now we talk about what I'll say is the really hard part, which is, how are we going to actually re-engineer our processes to be successful in the implementation of a robotic solution? And so as much as I'm a technologist and I believe that technology is the solution to everything, I'm going to be the bearer of bad news that robotics in and of themselves are not going to solve your staffing challenges. So to the previous point, if you think that you're struggling today and by bringing, a robot in, it's going to solve all of your challenges without having to change anything else, that's likely not the way it's going to work out. The answer is, re-engineering processes to actually create opportunities for automation. That's what will actually create the efficiencies and reduce dependency on staff. And so, this is to think through, if we're doing it this way today, that was likely optimized for having people do it, right? Knowing that I don't need to worry about workflows or the specific directions that people are going in and out of doors or things like that, because it's people, they're going to figure out what works. Well, when we think about robotics, now we have to think about, well, I'm going to automate this task, right? So if I'm going to automate that task, what are the other things around it that I need to change to make sure I'm getting the most benefit out of that automation? And so I'm going to walk through some examples from a partner of ours that has put robotics in place and has seen some pretty tremendous value delivered. So when we think about this, and again, it all really starts with understanding your processes today, whether it's food service, whether it's floor care, whether it's anything else. Step one is literally to take a step back and look at your processes. I can't tell you how many communities that I've gone into where we've been talking about food service robotics, and they don't even totally have an understanding of how chaotic their processes are today. They say, we've got people in place, we get the job done, but taking someone back and saying, let's just watch. Let's watch a service, let's see how it operates, and let's see where the opportunities are to kind of make things better. Typically, like even just that first step is enough to get people to think, man, like even without robotics, there's some opportunity for us to have some efficiency gains. So let's think about, not only how we do that, but then how we also automate some of these other pieces. So we look at this workflow of what's happening within a building, and we start thinking like, what are the things that we can bring in to make this easier? So when we think about that resident being seated in the restaurant, like, is there a reservation system? Like, are they showing up at a specific time, or are they just showing up whenever they're ready to go? Are there ways that we can prevent some of the backlog of people if we actually have a kind of timed system? Now we get them at their table. They're ready to order. To the previous point, are people taking those orders on a piece of paper? Are they taking them on a slip and taking them to the back of the house? Are they taking it down on a piece of paper and then walking over to a kiosk, somewhere in the dining room or over on the wall? Or maybe did they have like point of sale tablets that they're just carrying around with them? So they can walk up to the table, they can take that order on the tablet, they can make sure that it is sent all the way back to the kitchen, and there's no other activity that they need to take, right? We think about food and beverages being prepared. How do we focus on communication here of when that food is ready, when drinks need to be refilled? This is where, you may look at new roles that need to be created. So as we've seen in the food service side, this whole idea of an expediter in the back of house is kind of a critical role. Who is going to be that person in back of house that when that food is ready, instead of, sending a page to someone up front, that person's going to grab that food, they're going to put it on the robot, they're going to send it to the table that it needs to go to, and make sure that as soon as that food is ready, it is out the door. Nothing's sitting there, nothing's getting cold, nothing's sitting under heat lamps. And then, overall, there's all sorts of little kind of complementary things. So this whole idea of section support carts is something that came up through one of our customers. So they said, man, we have people that are going back into the kitchen all the time to grab water, to grab lemonade, to grab ketchup, to grab an extra fork because somebody dropped a fork, or napkins or things like that. Maybe what we should actually do, if our goal is to keep those people on the floor, is have some support carts kind of strategically organized throughout the dining room so they can grab what they need. It's right there. They never have to leave the floor. They never have to leave the view of the residents. And then overall with all of this is really this idea of training. Behavior changes are tough. By nature, people don't necessarily want to change the way that they're doing things. So how do we train them on the value that's being delivered through these solutions? And then how do we make sure, as we have things like staff turnover, that when new people come in, they're getting the full brunt of training, right? They're not coming in and learning, bad practices from someone else, but they're learning like, this is the way we do things. This is why we do it. And if you're going to come work for us, like these are the expectations. So that's a huge piece that we really try to focus our attention on. So, this is an example from one of our partners of a typical, their typical dining room. And what they were able to see is they went from having one front of house worker, so one staff member be able to care for, maybe 3, maybe 4 tables, to one staff member being able to care for 5 to 6 tables at a time by putting these robotic solutions in place. So this one specifically, it's a larger dining room. They actually have 3 robots all running simultaneously, all kind of sitting in the kitchen waiting to go. As soon as that food is ready, they're using them to bring them out. If there's dirty dishes that need to go back to the kitchen, they can put them on the robots, send it back to the dish pit, and it just becomes a very efficient machine. And so, this is one where you even think about things like space design, right? So the good news, I think, for our industry in general is we have to think about accessibility all the time, right? We have residents that are using walkers or using wheelchairs, using some type of mobility aid, and they need space to get within, get through these buildings. The good news is these robots don't need any more space than a typical wheelchair or walker. So as long as there's space enough for our residents to get through, these robotic solutions can get through the same thing. Now, when we get to the back of house, it may be a bit of a different question, right? So we think about robotics and we think about this kind of flow of traffic. This is an example where this group actually did a complete remodel of their kitchen. So their kitchen before had a singular kind of swinging door entrance. They said, this is a choke point. We have people coming out, people going in, robots coming out, robots coming in, and this becomes a choke point for our service. So what they did is they actually remodeled their kitchen to the point where they had an entry door and they had an exit door, and doors that they could just keep open during service. And there now became a flow. Everybody went in the entrance, robot and human alike. Everybody came out the exit, same thing. And so now they had this flow of traffic, which made them even more efficient. And so this is where, again, like the technology itself is one thing, but the other things that we can do to support it and make it even more effective and efficient give us kind of a multiplier on our value. So beyond this, we think about how we hire people. This is an example where this customer went and they went from hiring, front of house culinary staff or, waiters and waitresses to we're going to do section attendants. We're going to change the job title. We're going to change the expectations. Your job now is much more to focus on, this section that I oversee and I own this area. And so whatever it means for these residents to have the best experience possible, that is what my job is going to be tied to. And so changing the expectations. One of the cool things for this site specifically is they were able to take the savings that they saw, and we'll talk about some of the details here. They were able to take some of the savings that they were able to generate within their food service program and actually turn it into frontline wage increases. So I think for their staff, they went from something like $13 or $14 an hour to like the $18 to $20 an hour, which for that staff member is a life-changing amount of money, right? On the other side, it suddenly makes them way more attractive when they're trying to address talent and bring in talent into the community, that they're no longer competing with, the fast food restaurant around the corner. They're now competing with maybe higher end dining. And so they're getting a different class and caliber of worker that they're actually bringing in at this point. So thinking about this holistically and what are all those pieces that can change, this is another piece of that. Talk about all of those. Now we think about outcomes. So the outcomes piece is very interesting here because we're really thinking about, again, what is the benefit to the community? We're taking on this change. We're taking on potentially this new cost. What is the benefit that we're bringing, and to whom are we actually bringing that benefit? So what we saw through our testing was there's kind of three categories here. Resident benefits. So an overall increase in resident satisfaction, increasing the customer satisfaction score for a dining program by introducing robotics. The cool thing for me here, I told you a little bit about, residents really actually like these solutions. They think it's cool that they're bringing them in, and that the community is investing in this new technology. One of the interesting parts that we saw was residents were experiencing faster customer service, more face time with the service staff. So, they had a need, and it wasn't I don't know where my server is. They might be in back of house. It's no, my server's right here. If I need something, I can call it out and I'm going to get it right away. One of the things that we saw that was really interesting that was a little tougher to measure was there was a perception from residents that the food was actually coming out hotter. And we didn't actually measure, we didn't go in there with, thermometers and measure things. But the perception was, because the food service delivery was now automated, that things weren't sitting in back of house, that things weren't sitting under a lamp and getting cold because the staff member was taking care of another table. The perception from the residents was, as soon as my food is ready, that food is coming out the door. It shows up to my table and it's hot and ready to go. And so all of this stuff kind of adds up into that kind of customer satisfaction score. The next group we look at is the actual employees themselves. So your staff members. The goal of all of this is ultimately the staff is doing more fulfilling work. Staff engagement is a huge thing. and staff members waiting back in the kitchen, cruising on their phone until the food is ready isn't necessarily, fulfilling. And so being able to spend more time with residents, have more meaningful conversations, have better interactions, turned into staff feeling more fulfilled. Less time walking between, their sections and the kitchens. And we talked about the less distracting for back of house staff as well, with all these people coming and going. One of the cool ones that came out of this was this whole idea of staff members were going home less tired. So because they weren't having to carry as much as around, right? The robots were bringing food out to the dining room. They weren't having to do as much running back and forth. So we had staff members actually call out that, you know what, like, this is great. I get home and I don't immediately collapse into my couch, right? I don't collapse into my chair because I'm exhausted from the day. I go home and I feel good. I'm ready to continue the day. The other piece here is, I talk about the residents being super acceptant of robotics. The honest answer is employees are going to be your toughest sell, because you're asking them to go through that behavior change, right? So those are the groups that you need to involve kind of early in the conversations to say, we're doing this. What feedback do you have? How can we make sure that you feel good about this change that we want to implement? Giving them some ownership is going to help deliver that buy-in down the line. And I'll talk about some other kind of tips here in a minute. And then finally, you have things like operator benefits. And so this is where, for the specific customer that I was talking about before, they have 3 robots in their independent living and assisted dining room. They were able to cut 280 hours of work per week, just in their one restaurant. And so that is where they were able to take all of that money that was being saved and actually turn it into front of house staff increases. So I talked about here, like a 40% increase. So we've talked to other, customers who are saying like, hey, we can take these savings and actually invest in other things that have been on the back burner that we just don't have the cash to run with. And so the $10,000, the $20,000, the $30,000 worth of savings that we're going to realize, we're actually going to put that to use in other things that we've wanted to do and just haven't had the opportunity. So there's all sorts of different ways to kind of look at these benefits and the impact that they're having, and how do we actually move that into a larger win, right? How do we get a multiplier on this thing? So as you think about your role within this change management piece, these are really some of the questions that we should be asking. So, we have to think about, what are all the tasks that need to be done? And so this is getting beyond food service now, right? So now we're just back to all the things that happen within a building. What are all the tasks that need to be done? What are the tasks that are happening the highest number of times per day, right? So if we're thinking about the things we want to automate, it's not necessarily something that we only do once a week, right? It's probably something that we do multiple times a day, maybe 10 times a day, 20 times a day or more, saying that, all right, if we automate that thing, we're actually going to get a real return on this investment. Which ones do we have bandwidth for? This is one where it's the kind of like, where do we start? And the answer to the first question and where the largest opportunity is, that may be the answer to this one of, all right, we're going to take on one change at a time. And so, this is the bandwidth we have. We're going to go after this change. We're going to implement it. We're going to let it mature. And then we're going to go look at the next thing. I think which things require a human touch. So, the honest answer is there's a lot of things that a robot cannot do that a normal staff member can. And so if we're thinking about EVS activities, right? If I'm thinking about floor cleaning and I'm thinking about vacuuming floors or mopping floors and things like that, that's something I can have a robot do. It doesn't require a whole lot of human touch. It just requires knowing this is the area that I want to take care of. Now, maybe surface disinfection is something that does actually require human touch, right? So I'm cleaning windows, I'm cleaning surfaces, I'm cleaning, door handles and things like that. That's going to be a lot tougher for a robot, right? It needs dexterity. It needs all these other things. So how do I split those tasks that are needed to be done between the things that I can automate and the things that I probably can't automate today? And then think about, the larger questions. What new maintenance is required for the robots? Who's going to take care of that? So if I have a robot that I'm bringing in and it has batteries, if it's a floor care robot and it has a bucket that needs to get dumped at the end of the shift, it has a vacuum bag that needs to be replaced. There are some new tasks that will come up, and we need to think about who is taking ownership of those tasks. In a lot of buildings today, the maintenance guy gets pulled into everything. Does that person have the skills necessary or the support necessary to take care of a robotic solution in the building? And this is where we talk about the difference between maybe going out and buying a solution that you can, buy off of a website somewhere, to really buying a service that may be inclusive of the robot and the service packages behind it, where if something goes wrong, we're going to send somebody out to take a look at it and make sure that it's fixed. You don't have to worry about it yourself. The other piece is, what's the kind of total cost of ownership? So depending on the solutions, there's all sorts of things out there where it's, like you can go out and buy a robotic solution. But all that covers is X, Y, and Z. And if you want coverage for the battery, which is likely the first thing to ever go in any technology solution, that's going to cost an extra this, that, and the other. If you want a service plan, like if you want us to come out and look at it, if you want to know that when it breaks, we're going to come out and take a look, or we'll get it fixed, maybe that's another monthly cost. And so now you have the purchase price, and you also have the monthly costs, and you have other things that rack up. And so what is that total cost of ownership that I'm actually signing myself up for? And that's really where this final piece comes in of, when we talk about buy versus lease versus, service plans and everything else. This is where, an informed consumer is going to be able to make better choices. And so as you're thinking about this within your communities, think through the role that all of these pieces would actually play. And adoption isn't always easy. We've kind of talked about it already, but change management truly is the key to success here. Implementation of any of these solutions is going to require some behavior change, right? So we're going to have to change the way people are operating. We're going to change the things that people are doing, change their roles. And so this is where, to my previous point, this staff buy-in is hugely, hugely important. Like I said, if this is something that you're starting to look into now, bring your staff along on that journey. Ask them, what are the things that you hate doing every day? What are those tasks that are repetitive and are not value added? Let's start looking at those. If you're talking about bringing robotics in, bring them into the conversation about what other things you can do to bring more efficiencies to your operation. And think about that new skills development piece. So if we're going to develop new skills, like what does that look like? What does that process look like? Who owns it? Who's going to be the expert for this solution within the building? We talked about the process re-engineering across roles. And this really is that whole idea of there may be new roles that we need. And so I talked about that expediter in the food service side, right? That might be a new role that we need because we're changing the way we do things. The other side of this is, it may mean that there is a new communication, a new way to market our building that we want to get out there, that there's going to be process re-engineering of the timing behind things of, today we clean floors during the day because we don't want to do it at night and wake people up. But an autonomous solution may actually be quite a bit quieter than a traditional system. So it's something that we can just roll overnight. So thinking about those pieces and again, not just necessarily dropping technology into the current way you do things. And then again, I talked about it, that new role description that actually incorporates the use of technology. Show your workers that you're investing in technology and you're investing in these tools to make them more effective, them more efficient. And then at the bottom here, I just kind of have a comparison of two different operators that we worked with and how adoption of robotics worked for them. The first operator, early staff buy-in, talked through the process change, got everybody bought in. When the robot showed up, people were excited. They were excited to learn, excited to put it in place. They had clear measurable goals defined on this. Here was the impact that they were trying to have. Here was the things that they were going to measure. And here's how they were going to show success as they went down this line. They were able to make the changes to actually change their staffing ratios to say, all right, we're going to go from, 16 residents to one staff member to 30 residents to one staff member because of these changes that we're making. And they were prepared to make that change early on in the process. And ultimately, they saw an FTE reduction in need. They saw net savings. So even after the cost of the robotics, they saw net savings every month by putting this change in place. A separate operator, I will certainly not recommend this. They surprised their staff. Staff didn't know that a change was coming. They told them that, hey, the day of, hey, we're going to have a group here that's going to help us with robotics. We're going to change the way we do dining services. If you're asking people to make a fundamental change to the work that they do, don't spring it on them. Don't surprise them and expect them to take it well. Expect a little bit of a revolt. And this is why those conversations need to happen early. They also had no goals defined before the pilots. So they brought robotics in and they kind of took this, well, we'll see how it works mentality. They didn't have goals. They didn't have some finish line they were trying to hit. And by the time they got to the end of this kind of pilot period, the conversation was, well, what do you think? How did it work? How do you feel? Are you ready to do this, for longer and more buildings, those types of things? And the answer was, well, it worked okay. We didn't really have anybody complain about it. That is not a glowing recommendation, right? Lack of complaints does not equal acceptance. And so, they ultimately failed to utilize this solution to its full potential. They saw marginal value, but it fundamentally didn't change the way that they were doing anything. And they didn't see a cost benefit for the way that they were operating their service. And so because of that, those learnings were not transferred across buildings. They weren't able to say, hey, here's a best practice that we have figured out. Here's how we made it work for us. And, sister campus, across the city or across the state, here's what you should do to be successful as well. They struggled through that process. And ultimately it then became the sister site wanted to do it. They basically had to start from scratch. They started the learning all over. They went through the same process of not necessarily having well-defined goals, and they showed the same struggle. So I can't emphasize this enough of, these steps of adoption and this planning that kind of goes behind these things is really important. So kind of finally here, really want to talk about just your role in change management. And so you're on this webinar, you're interested in the impact that robotics could have. So what is the role that you can play if you want to see this thing kind of take the next steps? Number one, again, understand where you're spending your effort. Understand the prioritization. Where do you want to start here? Do you want to start with food service? Do you want to start with something else? Where are you seeing the pain and where do you want to start? And let's prioritize that. Learn about the various solution offerings. Go out and do some of your own research. Use partners to learn about what else is out there. But understand that there is no silver bullet. There is no singular solution to all of these problems. So understand what's out there, understand the differences between them, and what's going to work best for you. Finally, someone needs to own the transformation within the building. This is probably one of the things that we see as the biggest struggle when we talk about this change management and bringing robotics in, is there's not a clear, I call them the cheerleader, right? There's not a clear owner of this process within the building who is going to make sure that every day this thing is getting used. And when new people come in, that they're getting trained and that this is the way things are done within this building. You need to have that vocal leader. Whether that's an ED, whether it's a food service manager, an EVS manager, or something else, you need someone who's going to be kind of constantly beating the drum to make sure that people understand, like, this is the way that we do things from here on out. And the expectation is that, that you're supportive. And then educate that on up, right? Educate your organization, educate the people that it's going to impact, educate your leadership on the opportunities that are tied to these types of solutions. And I've got kind of a few points at the bottom that are little like tidbits that you can certainly use. So robotics can help reduce open positions. So if hiring is a big issue, hey, if we actually put this in place, maybe it can reduce some of our open burden, right? It can reduce those open positions. It can attract new talent, and optimize our current staff, maybe even reduce turnover because we're showing that we're investing in our existing staff. Most robotic solutions have a total cost of ownership that is very low. So if you're using it consistently, and this is where the big if comes in, right? If you're trying to automate something that you're doing once a week, you're not going to see this value. If you're automating something you're doing every day, all of a sudden, because you're doing it constantly, the cost of that solution really drops dramatically if you take it down to like, what am I actually paying per task or per hour? And then finally, just, robotic solutions overall can be, up to 80% more effective and efficient than manual efforts when applied to the appropriate tasks. So floor care is one of the ones that we call out here. We talk to people who say, like, floor care is happening with our building, but it's not great. We know that we're missing spots. We know that we're not getting full coverage. We know that it's maybe not happening as often as we want it to. But when we bring a robotic solution in place, we've mapped the space. We know that every single day, every single night, when I'm running this thing, it's going to hit that spot. No doubt. And so that efficiency gain is something that a lot of people are interested in as they think through the value that I'm getting for my money. So lessons learned, clearly define the process change, engage those stakeholders early, provide adequate training and resources, and monitor and evaluate progress, right? So training, measure. These are the things that you really want to focus on, when you're focusing on a change management, whether it's along with robotics or something else. So at that point, a little bit of kind of what's next. I've talked about, food service here, and that's where we really started our focus. The next phase of this for us is really this deep dive into the EVS robotics side. Floor care is a big one because that's been vocalized by our customers. We're looking at what it looks like from a sanitation. So this one in the middle is a UV disinfectant robotic solution, where if you think about room turnover and things like that I can push it into a room, I can hit a button, close the door. It's going to basically navigate through the room, UV disinfect that entire room. It has safety mechanisms built in where someone opens the door or something else, it automatically shuts off. But again, like, what are some of these tasks that we can automate within a building? And well into the future, maybe what are we looking at? Things like robotics for physical therapy. This is something that's actually becoming a little, more and more common. Think about people that are recovering from, maybe they had knee replacement surgery, people that are recovering from a stroke. And we're looking at robotic solutions that can actually help in that recovery. Helps to make sure that they're actually progressing the way they should. Helps make sure that, maybe you worry about people that they aren't getting exactly what they need from a rehab perspective. And there's some way that we can make sure that we're being consistent in that application. This is something that is certainly being looked at. Another one that we're looking on the food service side is we have a lot of people saying, listen, the front of house stuff is great, but I can't find back of house people either. Are there robotic solutions that can help in the back of house as we're preparing food? The honest answer today is kind of. There's solutions, again, if you think about this task versus people, there's solutions that can do individual tasks. So where do we see robotics in food service today? We see them at fast food restaurants where they're flipping burgers because we're producing 1,000 or 2,000 burgers a day. They're dropping fries into a deep fryer and bringing those out because we're doing that over and over throughout the day. There's not necessarily a robotic solution that's in place today that can say, well, this person wants an omelet, this person wants a cheeseburger, and I can make all of those things happen. But we are seeing some things like, autonomous salad creation or bowl creation or things like that, where it's, all right, I can dip into these things. I can create something that is based off of a request from a resident and put that out front. But this one's still pretty early overall. And my personal favorite is robotic lawnmowers. I think it's probably more so a robotic lawnmower itself than a robot pushing a lawnmower. But again, what are all those tasks that need to be done? How much money is being spent on lawn maintenance, on things like that, where if I can, bury a line or even just use GPS tracking, put an automated lawnmower in place and say, all right, here's the area that I want you to mow. We have customers that are talking about changing their outdoor landscaping to optimize for robotic lawn care. because it's one more thing that they can take cost out of the operation. So these are all things that we're looking at that are maybe a little bit further out. Robotic lawnmowers, I'll say, is probably the one that's closest, but it's still pretty early. So with that, I'm going to kind of wrap up. I'm going to say in general, open to keeping this conversation going. We're going to do some Q&A here. So there's a Q&A that you guys can drop some questions into, and I'll certainly stick on here for a while to answer those. And overall, if you want to learn more, drop us an email. So you can drop us an email at robots@directsupply.com. If you want to learn more about these things, we're more than happy to set up a call, kind of talk through what we're working on, answer some of your questions. All right. So first question coming in. It takes a human to load up the robot with trays, food, etc. How does that still improve productivity? It's an awesome question. And honestly, this is where that whole idea of there may be a new role needed, right? So if you think about, I have, so let's say that 16:1 to 30:1 ratio in front of house, right? So I can have one staff member take care of 4 tables versus 6 tables. So I'm gaining some efficiency there. And if I'm gaining, 1.5, 2.5 FTE efficiency, what may need to happen is if there's a new role that gets created in the back of house, or it could be a change to an existing role. So it might be an expediter, depending on the size of your service. It may be a person that actually needs to expedite, who needs to take those trays, load up the robot, and send them out. What we've seen in a lot of the smaller services is really just having the existing food service staff do that. As soon as the food is ready, versus placing the food up in a window, they place the food on the robot. They say, yep, this is for table 7. They hit the button on the front of the robot cruises out to table 7. So depending on the size of your dining program, it may or may not be a different role. But there's absolutely, value that can be generated either way. How can we find out if there's any communities in our area that are using robotics? This is another good question. A couple different ways. One, feel free to reach out to us, and we can certainly do some investigation and understand if there's communities in your specific geography that are using this. The honest answer is you may see this across other operators too. You might see this in restaurants. So I'm here in Milwaukee. There's a handful of restaurants here in even the downtown area that are using robotics in their food service. So there's one that's a barbecue restaurant that brings the barbecue right out to your table. There's a breakfast and kind of brunch spot on the other side of town that's using them. And what we've done is for people that were really early before we didn't necessarily have a lot of senior living sites that were using this, we'd actually go to those and we'd say, listen, it's one thing to kind of see the tech. It's another thing to see it in action. And so there's a fair amount of press that's actually happened around some of these solutions recently as well, where if you even just look up, robotics and dining in your area, local news stations love to go out and cover, a robot in a new restaurant or a new senior living facility. It's a cool marketing play for them as well. And so that's a way that you can go out and look. All right, another question. The dining bots are great. Floor cleaning bots are great too. What do you think the next robotic introduction will be in senior living? It's a good question. I honestly think that I'd like to say that it's going to be clinical, but I think clinical will actually take a little while. I think that some of the outdoor stuff will probably be what we see. So some of the lawn care and other pieces. We have some groups are actually looking when they're talking about like CCRC campuses or life plan communities that are talking about using robotics to help people get around the community itself. And so we're seeing some kind of like autonomous taxi services get tested out. I'd say that's probably pretty early as well. But even just like delivery services within communities of, over the course of the pandemic, especially for the independent living, assisted living side, the number of Amazon packages, DoorDash deliveries, things like that were happening within communities exponentially grew. And all of a sudden it became like, we have to hire someone just to go deliver packages from our front door to the residence room. And so we've seen some solutions there become more and more prevalent as well. The clinical side, I would love to see more focus on because we know that is a real pain point. But like I said, I think it's likely going to start with just clinical support, i.e., bringing those supplies from point A to point B. There's some solutions out there that are looking at robotics for clinical care. They're doing like nurse call response. So when that nurse call button is pressed the first time, and today you don't know if that means it's an emergency or someone just wants a drink of water, can there actually be a robotic solution that could go to the room, have an interaction with the resident? The ones that we're seeing so far actually it's like a telepresence system. So there's a person on the other side that will talk to the resident, understand what the resident needs or what the problem is, and then escalate from there. So if it's an emergency, they can make sure a staff member is immediately going to that room. If it's just I need something to drink or something else, it can kind of be prioritized a little bit lower. And so that's something we're seeing that's early on. I think we're trying to measure what the value of those solutions are. But I think, more and more clinical support is going to be needed. We'll see if there's any additional questions. Here we go. Are there any robotics answering call lights in nursing homes? Great question. Is Alexa or Hey Google being incorporated into resident rooms? So the robotics for answering call lights, I just talked about a little bit. Again, it's still pretty early. I think we've seen it. There's a handful of communities in the Atlanta area that I think we've seen that are testing this, but it's still kind of to be seen if the value is worth the cost, right? So if we're responding to call lights, what is the downstream value that we're actually providing for clinicians? Are we truly saving time, or are we just adding another step? I think that's some of the testing that's going on right now. In terms of the voice assistants and them being incorporated into resident rooms, absolutely. I think we're seeing more and more of this happen, integrated into all sorts of systems, right? Some are integrated into nurse call systems. They're not necessarily the Google or Alexa, but there is voice communication, two-way voice communication being integrated in there. As we think about the AI piece, the Alexa and Hey Googles, we are seeing that with some of the, I'll say, resident engagement platforms of, we want residents to have the opportunity to ask about the activities that are happening in the community today, to be able to understand, what are the lunch options, or what does my schedule look like today? Or, call for help, call for assistance because a light is out or something else. We're seeing more and more of those things come in. And I think the honest answer is, as the current population kind of moves out of senior care and a new population comes in, there's going to be probably more acceptance to those types of solutions as well. So if I think about, I always talk about kind of wearable technology of, with current senior living residents, there's some adoption, but it's not huge overall. But if you look at the next generation to come through, they're going to be more tech native. They're going to be more used to wearables, more used to voice assisted technology. And I think we're going to see that kind of help to push things faster. Are there any floor bots that can clean under dining chairs that are sitting under tables without moving the chairs? Unfortunately, I am not aware of any so far. And this is where, that whole conversation of human touch comes in. So if I think about dining rooms, if I think about areas that have a ton of furniture that I'm going to have to move around, there's not necessarily a great robotic solution for that today. When we think about robotics, I think, we've had some customers talk about just like Roombas and things like that, right? Commercial, taking consumer devices and actually using them for commercial activities. I don't recommend that in general, just because, one, they're not made for it. Two, typically the capacity of those things is pretty small. So if you're talking about a dining room, they're not really going to get it done for you. And so for things like a dining room, it may be something where that is where you still need to actually use your physical staff. But you can use automation in hallways, in large common areas, in large spaces where you don't have to worry about, all the things that are in there and moving around on a regular basis. Speaking of the kind of moving around things, and I'll talk about this a little bit when we go into the product section, but that kind of mapping process that is done with robotics is based off of kind of how the room is set up. And one of the things that we looked at when we looked at solutions was, how well does this solution work when the room organization changes, right? When a table moves or some chairs move, does that completely throw the solution off because, something has changed in that space? Or is it smart enough to actually see, yep, something's changed, but I still know where I'm going. I can update my maps in real time and kind of move through these things. So that's a great question overall. What kind of liability insurance would you have to carry or add? We haven't honestly seen any change in liability insurance for anyone who has brought robotics in so far. The honest answer is the number of safety mechanisms that are built into these solutions is pretty incredible. Combinations of cameras, radar sensors, LiDAR sensors, weight sensors, balance sensors, all sorts of things. And so we really haven't seen any interaction of a robot accidentally running into someone or anything else. The solutions always put the safety of residents as the top priority. So if there's not a pathway through, it's not going to push its way through. If someone gets up and moves in front of it, it's going to immediately stop. If someone tries to put their weight on it to balance or something else, it's going to automatically stop. So we haven't seen a need so far, nor have we seen any incidents of a negative impact to anyone. If there's additional questions and you're looking for some answers, feel free to shoot us an email. This robots@directsupply.com goes to a handful of us internally that are really kind of focusing on robotic solutions overall. But we're happy to have further conversation and answer your questions. If you'd like to stick around over the next roughly 15 minutes, I'm going to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into the kind of product portion of the webinar. So if you can stick around, great. If not, thank you for joining. I've talked about robots overall. I talked through the process that we have followed. Now I just want to give you just a little bit of insight into where we landed and why. And if this is something that you're interested in, we'd obviously love to have a conversation. So through the whole process that we went through, we ultimately landed on partnering with a group called Bear Robotics. They have a platform called Servi, and actually a new robot that they just brought out called Servi Plus, which is, I say, kind of a beefier robot, a little more capacity, a little more capability. But this is a group that we partnered with because our goal is that we had very similar goals from a robotic standpoint. When I look at robotics and I think about this, there's all of these different applications for robotics within a community. I want to make sure that our customers have the best experience possible when they're using the first robotic solution. So as we think about, as we were looking at the food service side, we said, hey, there's some solutions that are out there that are okay, but we want to partner with someone who has the same focus on customer service that we do. So not only did we think that their technology was actually the best, but that the service mechanism behind the scenes was actually awesome. They have service folks all across the US. So if at any given point in time a robot goes down for whatever reason, they can typically remote diagnose, or at the very least get someone there within 24 hours to make sure that they resolve that issue. Our partnership with them is awesome because they didn't necessarily have a ton of experience in the healthcare side. And we were able to bring our experience of healthcare delivery, the way the healthcare system works, to their experience around robotics, and really kind of fine tune and finesse this solution. So all the stuff that we just talked about for the previous hour around the change management and the impact that it can have, we're working together to kind of bring that to our customers to say, listen, let's talk through how you're operating today. Let's talk through the process to get from where you are today to where you want to be. And we want to help you define that and help you down that pathway. So Bear, awesome partner, and we're super proud to be able to carry their solution for all of healthcare. Nothing new here. The three kind of core functionalities that it provides, we kind of talked about these at a macro level. Food running, so this is really the bringing food from back of house to front of house. Bussing, so taking those dirty dishes from front of house back to the dish pit. And then this whole idea of patrolling. So we've seen this with some communities where they have snack time and they want Servi to roll around the dining room with snacks so that people can grab stuff off as they're playing games or doing something else. There's all sorts of kind of capabilities that are here that we can take advantage of. This is, someone asked about the safety piece, and that's where this nimble navigation comes from. So as you can see here, people pulling out a door or pulling out a chair, a server standing there, somebody walking up. Servi is actually awesome at being able to navigate through these situations. So 3D cameras that look at the floor and look at the ceiling to know where it is within the space. The LiDAR sensor that's actually low on the base is looking at real-time movements. So it's looking at where are those chairs, where are those people, where can I fit, where can I not fit. And so this is why we really haven't seen any issues come from bringing these into space, even though there's always, worries about we have a frailer population. We have a population that's liable to fall. We don't want this to just run into somebody. This has been built to be safe. A lot of people ask about the kind of mapping and configuration process, and I'm kind of running through all of this pretty quickly. But when we go into a space, and this is a perfect example of, here's a dining room where we went in and we actually used the robot itself to map the space. Excuse me. So we take the robot, we roll it through the space, we use all the sensors on board to create a map. And that's what you see here. Then we go in after the fact and we put in what I call all the go and no-go areas. So all the red areas here are, listen, I don't want you to go past this point. I don't want you to go into this area for various reasons, right? Either like there's a flooring transition that I don't want you to deal with, or like, hey, this is just a no-go. This is the end of our dining room. I don't want you going out in the hallway. And then there's also the ability to add these other areas. So the reference points, where are all the tables? Where are all the points that I want the robot to stop within my dining room, in my back of house? Are there slow down or speed up areas? Are there areas where we've got a tile floor and it's kind of rough? Excuse me. So I want the robot to slow down when it's got a bowl of soup on top of it. Or I have a longer hallway and I don't want it to go super slow and cautious down this long hallway and take forever to get to the other side. We can speed up a little bit there. So this is something that we can customize over time. And then in general, like this is really the kind of idea of Servi and Servi Plus. So Servi is the first generation. It has really kind of 3 levels. So there's these top 2 levels, and then there's bottom container. So you can have another tray there, and Servi itself can carry 3 trays, about anywhere from 6 to 7 meals maybe. We had some customers that said, listen, we have larger tables, we have larger services, we want to be able to support multiple tables in one run. And that's really where Servi Plus came in. So Servi Plus actually has 4 different trays. They're a little bit larger, but the actual footprint of Servi Plus is only marginally larger than the footprint of Servi. So they can get through almost the same area. So you see the size is about 21 inches. So it only needs 2 feet to be able to get through any space. And we can load Servi Plus up with 12 plus dishes at a time. Servi Plus also has some kind of upgraded suspension and other things, which make it a little more stable if you have rough floors, tile floors, things like that. So those are pieces that we can look into as well. And then we went through this a little bit in the slides, but this really shows that potential for savings depending on what you're paying per hour for staff. Hopefully you're not paying $15 an hour, but I know some parts of the country they are. So this is a little bit just to give you of what does that potential return on investment actually look like for putting these solutions in place. And then again, everything's included, which is really one of the great parts about this. We talk about wanting to make sure that the first experience with robotics is a good one. And that's where we kind of built this program out. The Servi unit itself is covered. So if anything ever happens to it, minus someone like pushing it down the stairs or something like that, it's covered. If it dies for whatever reason, if there's damage that occurs that's not malicious, it's covered. And if that means we have to come out and replace the unit, we're going to come out and replace the unit. This is another piece where when I'm talking to people about the whole thought of kind of leasing a solution versus buying a solution, overall, regardless of whether you're working with direct supply or anyone else, my guidance right now is that I think the lease model for these solutions is actually probably a little stronger, just because you have that benefit of if anything ever goes wrong, we're just going to replace this thing. And it's not we bought it, it got drop shipped to our door, it broke, and now I have no pathway to remediate this issue. So things to think about as you're thinking through potential solutions. as we're looking about it and thinking about how do we make sure that Servi works for you, that's where, we're the experts. Let's have the conversation. We'll assist you in identifying, how many robots do we need within the community based off the size of the community? Are there obstacles that we need to worry about? So do we have rough transitions between floors? Do we have doors that, that are going to become a problem? Are there, stairs or other things that might become an issue? Like, we're going to work with you to identify, yep, this is the right place to put it. This is how we're going to make sure that it's successful. And again, our goal is that you have a good experience through this, and it opens up the door for other, robotic solutions in the future. And then again, I talked about it earlier, supporting staff acceptance. We're going to work with you to make sure that you have everything you need to roll these ideas out to your staff. We have one-pagers. We have all sorts of documents that we can put in place. We can do webinars on here's why we're doing this. Here's the value that we think it's going to provide. And here's how we want to make this part of how you do your job and make this a part of your job that you actually enjoy. So we will walk through all of those steps with you as well. If this is something that you're interested in, so if you're interested on the food service side, like I said, we don't quite have the floor care side ready to go yet, but it's something we're actively working on. But if you're interested, this is really one where just reach out to us. So use that robots@directsupply.com, email, send us a note, and we'll work with you. And it's really straightforward. We'll work with you to identify an initial number of locations. So typically we say you don't want to start with just one. You probably want to start with 2 or 3 just because, there's a lot of moving pieces here, and people are a big part of the success story of automation as well. And so, typically what we say is, start in 2 to 3 different spots. Let's show the value that can be created. If there's one spot that is struggling, let's use the other spots that are succeeding and understand what's different between those. Maybe it's, we don't have a strong champion at one site. Maybe it's a site layout thing. Maybe it's something else. But we'll work with you to figure those pieces out. But then ultimately, we're going to gather info. We're going to understand, the dining room layout, the kitchen layout, how you're staffed, how your services actually operate. And what we'll do is we'll basically put a proposal together. So there's no cost to you for any of these pieces. We'll put a proposal together. We'll say, listen, here's what we think will work with you. Here's the process that we would follow to actually bring robotics into your community. And if it looks good to you, then typically it only takes us about 3 weeks to go from, signing a proposal to being able to have robots on site. So it's a pretty quick process that we can actually run through. So that's where I'm going to end it. I want to thank everybody for joining us.